when I hear the word geoeconomics, I recall TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement was being negotiated. It was in the last phase. I was having a discussion with a very senior trade lawyer in Washington, D.C., and we discussed details of it. And at the end, he said, well, all this is okay, but one missile in South China Sea and all this is down the drain. So geopolitics. So geopolitics, geoeconomics are joined at the hip. In fact, geoeconomics is a child of geopolitics. So that's the first background we have to keep in mind. Second, after the Washington Consensus phased out as a dominant global thought, new forms of industrial policy initiatives came up, and the current one, the new industrial policy, there's some research which looks at it in detail, shows the link between new industrial policy and national security focus. So today, the industrial policy, of which trade policy and investment policy are parts, is aimed at boosting national security. And the stances in this context, the extreme stances, examples are US and China. And if you have a spectrum, we are all somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. There's no one who's with the Washington Consensus part expression of the spectrum. In that background, I also recall a study by UK Department of Trade where they have projected exports and imports of 90 countries, 2030 and 2035. And they show that India will be the 7th largest exporter of goods and services by 2030 and 4th largest by 2035. When I looked deeper at it, I thought they were underestimating. India will reach that level earlier. However, the nature of that achievement, how relationships will be built so that a sustained effort can go on and a momentum can go on, requires some deeper thinking and effort. There we have to think in terms of an overarching strategy. Many aspects of that were expressed yesterday and today again in this session, and other ones we'll touch upon them. Once you have the larger strategy, you have to identify the key levers to push or pull. Key areas, policy initiatives, major problems that require multilateral solutions or partnerships. Uncertainty introduced, new forms of uncertainty are coming up, and we'll get comments. In fact, Dr. Arpita was joking with me that while we are talking here, maybe a new policy uncertainty will be introduced when somebody in the other part of the world wakes up and goes to X. He has his own he's not with X right now. So key policy elements and what are the mechanisms? These are all integrated aspects, but within this we have to identify the main areas of focus, and that's what I think our session will highlight. So I'll start with Mr. Sankalp Gurjar. Each of the speakers will have about 6 minutes, and then we'll have a question answer session. Amongst all of us, Sankalp Gurjar is the one with geopolitics, but he also works on geoeconomics because geoeconomics is part of geo. So over to you.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. This is just like my Gokhale Institute campus because I am surrounded there by all the economists, and being the only geopolitician there, I feel like, this panel is also like that. So thanks, Vivek. I would like to make 5 points. First and foremost, I think we have to accept that the world order that we are seeing, or rather we saw for the last 80 years, is in crisis. And the best part about this is nobody likes this world order. The ones who created it did not like it. Donald Trump, I think, signifies that. And I think the ones who were at the receiving end never liked it. So the question becomes, what should India do in this kind of a situation? As Nitin yesterday mentioned about Uganda and transitioning into a new paradigm, but that paradigm is yet to emerge. So the question is, what are India's interests and what India can do? And I think in that case, we have to start thinking what sort of world order we want for India's future growth trajectory. Second point I would like to imagine is Donald Trump as a factor that will have to come into policy making. And there is no anticipating Donald Trump. But still, if we are to make some educated guesses, I think I would like to start with Robert Lighthizer. The book, I think, is a must-read for all of us who are thinking about America, US, Donald Trump. What is the shape of future policy gonna be like, right? So there is this book called No Trade is Free. The title itself is pretty clear. And the book has clear reasons he has outlined. And he was a US trade representative in the last Trump era. He might become someone important even now. And I think he continues to shape thinking of American policy right now during Trump administration. Yesterday I was reading about in the book, he mentions 5-6 areas where India becomes a problem. He talks about how he tried to get India to lift tariffs, calls India, India has a political DNA of protectionism. So that is a language that has been deployed for India, and identifies some of the sectors like jewelry, like agriculture, even in terms of dry fruits. I mean, we would not imagine dry fruits being such a sticking point, but he has identified that. And he mentions that, it's just something that US has to accept, which basically means that American tariffs, American attention will be fixated on India at some point of time, and we'll have to be prepared. So the question is, what should be India's response? And I think India doesn't necessarily have to retaliate all the time. What India can do is perhaps absorb what America wants to impose on India, maybe have a threat of tariff, but negotiate and identify a larger picture. If the larger picture is there is a China-sized problem for India, and India needs American technology, American weapons, American support while taking on China, then I think we'll have to try and work with Donald Trump. And that would mean that it's not such a bad idea to absorb some of the costs that would be imposed on Indian domestic economy, Indian trade sector, right? So I think everybody is looking at retaliation. Canada, Mexico, China, we saw that. But India doesn't necessarily have to follow that path. Fourth point, I thought, while we are talking about Donald Trump, everybody is looking at it as if it's a calamity. But what if we consider Trump as an opportunity, right? I mean, it can be an opportunity to deepen India's ties with, say, Europe, with Gulf, with Indo-Pacific, some of the trade deals that were stuck. Maybe India-EU FTA. Can it be pushed forward with the Trump, in White House? Can India join CPTPP? Can we think of that? RCEP is, I think, out of the question. But why not CPTPP, right? I mean, at some point of time, India has to graduate to that level of standards where CPTPP becomes imperative, and it has Japan, Australia, and other friendly countries, right? So that could be on the external front. On the internal front, Trump can be used perhaps as an opportunity to push some of the domestic reforms as well, right? I mean, just like 1991, you can cite external pressure, say that you cannot do without those reforms, maybe agriculture, maybe even in manufacturing, some of that perhaps can be pushed. And I think the final point that I would like to make is geopolitics will trump economics. And so I think we'll have to be prepared for making those calculations. Economic logic is based on the fact that you're looking for win-win solutions. You're looking for, expanding trade, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen. What we'll perhaps be looking at is something called as small yard, high fence, that Catherine Tai used to talk about it. We can reimagine that and apply that to countries, right? Some of the countries for which you have different set of tariffs. Some of the countries, for example, China again, you can have higher tariffs. You can protect your industries from the China threat, but you can perhaps try and engage with other partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have Dr. Rama Arun Kumar, who works on international trade and industrial issues. And at your ISID, you have mentioned, I read about you, two specific initiatives, recent initiatives. One is the India Industrial Development Report, which takes a wider perspective, plus key areas to focus on. And the second is the effort you made with Korea on partnerships, etc. And in the background of what has been mentioned, that we can use the emerging scenario to build stronger relationships plus new relationships. Your thoughts in the context of the topic today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I would like to make four certain kind of suggestions that India should consider given the present scenario. The first and foremost is to choose your allies very strategically. That the kind of political and trade agreements that we are entering into. And I think the wisdom has set upon the policymakers, wherein India has taken some very hardcore decisions of not joining associations like RCEP. The background study was done when I was in CII, and I was a part of it. So we had, looked at the India-China trade, and certainly it would have weakened India's position within the region, because India is already struggling with an adverse impact of the FTAs and SEPA with South Korea and Japan. So, aligning ourselves and getting into agreements is something that we need to be very strategic and very carefully picked up. This should align with our industrial progress. So basically, where India's industrial progress would benefit from these alliances should be the primary objective, and which needs a deeper study of the industrial sectors. So the requirements of the sectors is something that we need to be very clear about, and that should suit the alliances that we are getting into. The second aspect is resilient supply chains, which is a connected issue. So we need to again choose our partners in a way that our future has diversified supply chains. India is already struggling to be a part of active GVCs, global value chains. So we need to build up our backward and forward linkages strongly. So our backward linkages are quite strong because we are import dependent on a lot of countries for inputs. But our forward linkages is where we have to work on. Again, here the export competitiveness aspects of the sectors which can be kept in mind. The third is trade wars. So, we are all vulnerable in terms of the changing dynamics and across the globe. But in trade wars, the implications have been adverse for the countries involved, both US and China, as we have seen in the past. For India, now it's a challenge. So we should negotiate with US in the sense of bringing harmony to the trade policy. And because there is a lot of digression from the established trading system, India should take advantage from benefiting from the leverage that it can take in terms of promoting our own industries away from the regulations under which the trading system has been operating. The last point that I would want to make is India should strengthen its port infrastructure, because in order to be having a resilient supply chain, we are lagging in terms of this port infrastructure, where India has to be well connected with the trading system. It should offer a lot of benefits in terms of cost cutting and for the exporters as well as the importers, and have strategic investments come in from trading partners like South Korea, which is actually very interested and looking at India actively to invest. So we should take this opportunity to direct the investments in proper direction. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we now come to Dr. Indrani Bar Pujari. She is someone who combines many aspects of knowledge in herself, anthropologist, lawyer, IPR, environment, etc., and partnerships. So, in the context of the topic, geoeconomics and the future of growth and what India should do, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to ORF for having me over. Yeah, Sankalpji, you are not the only non-economist in this group. I was wondering what am I doing in a geoeconomics panel. But nevertheless, I am here to speak about intellectual property rights because IPRs are going to be center stage in any kind of geoeconomic strategy for the global south and for India. And intellectual property rights have always been an issue. And here, the rosy story first, we'll come to the challenges later. India, in its when it reframed or got a new national IPR policies of 2016, since then we have been aggressively enhancing our capabilities as a global innovation leader. And this is something with a focus on enhancing our geoeconomic strength and our negotiating power in negotiating strategic trade agreements. So we have positioned ourselves as a leader here. And this just last year, when the World Intellectual Property Indicators 2024 report showed that India now ranks 6th globally among the top 5 patent filing countries, which is something very new. And if we look at just over, I think, 2 years, there was a 150% jump in patent filings in India. And it's heartening that 50% of it has been domestic patents, which again is something very different. And the government would like to say it's because of the policy, how the policy has worked towards it, how we have reformed our patent laws, how we have reformed the patent system. So this is the rosy part, of course. But now coming to the challenges. India has always had a very fraught relationship with the US as far as IPRs are concerned. Just on a lighter note, when Trump, at the beginning of Trump 1.0 in 2016, there was a lawsuit filed by Trump against an Indian company. I would not divulge the name, just because they offered a credit card with the name, the company name Trump card. So that is on a lighter note what he thinks of the Indian companies and even infringing on his name. So, but that apart, we can expect that in the special 301 report, which U.S. Trade Representatives Office brings out every year, we are only going to be more, castigated and censured for our Section 3D and for the compulsory licensing provision, which is so important for Indian interests. So that is one part. Then I would also like to draw your attention to certain challenges we have faced, even in the world stage when we have been negotiating agreements. Particularly, I would like to draw your attention to the World Intellectual Property International. There was at the WIPO, an international legal instrument was drawn up last year. For providing mandatory disclosure of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge in patent applications. And this is a very important issue for the global south. And this treaty, which, is the culmination of almost 25 years of relentless work by India and other partners of the global south in having this provision. Nevertheless, we have this treaty now, but I would not like to look at it as a success for multilateralism. WIPO projects it as a success for multilateralism, but it's actually a half victory for the global south. And there is also fear that because we have made a lot of concessions there, it would also impact some of the stronger treaty provisions, particularly in the CBD, the Nagoya Protocol. So, and also undo some of the work we have done in India itself to, harmonize patent and biodiversity legislation, our more stringent provisions to protect our own interests. So these are my observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are actually, you've raised the issue of technology. We are approaching an era where the kind of technological options which become available will change everything we operate in terms of whether it's geopolitics or geoeconomics. And therefore, technology is a major area of focus. The second aspect is that technology is essential to address sustainability concerns. And the new presidency in the US has upturned that. How will the world, the rest of the world, and India specifically, manage to achieve the larger objectives, both internally? As a Delhi person, I am an affected party, and externally. So those are some of the key areas to focus on. And there are ideas in IPR which the multilateral system has tried to push, which is where research is funded through public funds, they should be open patents. So partnerships, those kind of ideas, those are underpinning everything, but the new technology will change the paradigm of the world. We will be strangers to that world very soon. And India is trying to focus on it. The part in India's policy making scenario is that policy implementation is an essential part of good policy making. And that aspect is not focused on. So I think we should also look at that. So now we come to Professor Arpita, an old friend, and one of the most knowledgeable trade and industrial policy persons I have come across. She has worked on a whole host of areas. So I'm sure you've chosen which areas to focus on, but please highlight the key areas which we should look at in the context of the subject matter.
Thank you, Harsh, and thanks to ORF for this invite. It's actually amazing that how you today look at trade and economics from what we looked at, say, 20 years ago. So basically, we were at that time, we were a closed economy. Everybody else said that, free trade is good. And with this free trade is good, this WTO was created. Then you kind of pull China into WTO, and China did forward-looking reforms based on that it has to enter the WTO. It entered the WTO, and now the question is, China damaged the WTO, so WTO should die. So that's where we stand. Okay. So what did actually China do? And how did it damage the WTO? The basic thing that it did was it actually initiated reforms. It created zones to try out it. Reforms went forward. But China was not new. We all tried to do that. We came out with our own SEZ policies. We did much more number of SEZ than anybody else in the world, but we haven't really been able to kind of benefit from trying out reform models which they did and which kind of allowed them to go to rest of the world. And also what they did is, once they were able to go to rest of the world, they were very quick to sign a lot of trade agreements. So there was a second point of view that trade agreements will secure you against global trade uncertainty. And now with the US first targeting Mexico and Trump, Mexico and Canada, and Canada retreating it without anybody thinking, how they should do a dispute resolution, what is the role of the dispute resolution mechanism, because WTO is weak. Are the entire systems in free trade agreements also weak? So can free trade agreement no longer give you security? These are kind of things that we need to now relook into and think through. Like Harsh, we've also thought like, CPTP is very good. Okay, it can give you security, but how much secure are we with different kinds of trade agreements now, and their dispute settlement mechanism is something that one needs to think through. Now, coming to the Indian strategy, like, India wants to be a part of the bigger player in the global value chain, yet be independent. And like all other countries, we have also some kind of protectionism which worked earlier, like, in certain cases like automobile, etc., the protectionism worked. In other cases, the protectionism has been implemented to protect certain domestic industries, be it dairy, be it retail, and that too till date worked. Now, if you go back to Trump first regime, what were the changes that we're looking into? Like, US was very gung-ho on India. They wanted to do a mini deal. We wanted to bring in FDI, and two places got stuck. One was the Walmart-Flipkart merger, which led Trump to retaliate and withdraw GSP. Secondly, we did not do the mini deal. And third was the BIT, the bilateral investment treaties, and India withdrew from them. And that has been a pain point. Now, in the budget, we did announce that, BIT will be looked into. So that's kind of a positive announcement that India did. Second positive announcement was India kind of kept itself pretty much politically aloof by saying, okay, if there is a illegal migrant, we take it back. If it is a legal migrant, you take care. And Trump makes an announcement that if you studied in the US, green card, etc., etc. So India smartly tried to position itself to protect the H-1B visa and all of that, which is a big, India ask list for the services sector. As a services exporter, we cannot really forego the market US, which is kind of 60% our market, and that's the sector that is doing well. Now, coming to goods, both sides have their pain point. Maybe we are worried about their tariff, they are worried about our tariffs. Our tariffs are very high, and if you look at our tariff range, it is not new that we have done product by product tariff liberalization for the US. If you look at apples, it is a 30% tariff. We suddenly went down to 15 with the US without any trade agreement. Then we went up. So that tariff with the US have always been a very flip-flop thing. So can be, so they bring out few products, we bring out few products, and we may now really need to think about a mini deal with the US, and we need to prepare our list of products. They need to prepare their list of products. In some cases, US has been in terms of access better than the European Union. For example, in the dairy case, European Union, Australia, UK banned us, but US did not. So we need to really, but they have a 40% tariff, we have a 150% tariff. Do both sides reduce is something we need to think through. Now, again, we need to think through whether we can do a digital trade agreement with the US, the DIPA kind of an agreement. Now, because we are not a part of the JSI, they are not a part of the JSI, we are not into a framework, but we are also a part of the IPEF. The IPEF has 4 pillars. We have been very shaky on the trade pillar, and that is something that may be thought through, because we have also done certain things with the US which we don't really talk about, but they are actually quite nice ones and may help us in the future. Just to give you an example, in the IPF, we have signed on the labor and environmental standards. If you look at the EU latest directive...
One minute.
Okay. If you look at the EU latest directive 2024, it is focusing on the corporate social responsibilities, which are quite well covered in the IPF pillar. So we have signed certain things. Again, go back to Harsh. What about the implementation? We are ILO compliant, many times more compliant than many EU member countries, but it is not always implemented on the ground. So we need to put our thoughts together, think through, and look forward to the visit of the Prime Minister next week to the US.
Thank you very much. Basically, I think in a conceptual framework for geoeconomics, we have to think of US, China, and rest of the world. And the kind of strategies which have to come up. With US, we have a larger possibility of partnerships which can be developed, because Trump once showed to us that US is stricter with us on trade than on the rest of the issues, and very keen on investment also. And trade and investment are two sides of the same coin, something which we have recognized, but then the policy implementation aspect has still to catch up. Now, our last speaker today is Apurva Mishra. He is part of the Advisory Council, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. He will speak on the overlap between foreign policy and economic policy issues, trade policy, investment policy included. He comes with not only knowledge of the theoretical aspects, but actual hands-on policy making experience also. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for those kind words. So much has been written and said about geoeconomics in the age of Trump since 2016 that it is impossible to say something new about the subject unless you say something crazy. And even if you say something crazy, someone would have said it recently. So I hope when Professor Harsh Pant and my friend Vivek invited me to speak here, they were not expecting some startling new point from me. What I'll do in the 6 minutes that I have is, in a constantly changing world, focus on the constants. What are the things that are not changing, both for the world and for our country? So let me start by first emphasizing the importance of global trade. Through all of the convulsions that we've experienced, some of which were discussed yesterday, to the world order, to global economy, global trade has remained as constant as ever. So from 2011 onwards, the ratio of global trade to global GDP has not changed, even though it is being recalibrated. So trade remains as important as ever, even though there are different kinds of challenges global trade faces on a daily basis. Is something that Dr. Singh said, that geoeconomics is the child of geopolitics. And so the geopolitical transformations in the world are having big economic implications. So for example, for the first time in close to 2 decades, the largest trading partner of India was United States and not China. And the largest trading partner of United States was Mexico, not China. I was reading some report about, I think it was OECD or one of the international organizations which published that of the $1.2 trillion of FDI that was invested across the world in 2022, about $180 billion worth of FDI was recalibrated, was shifted to different geopolitical blocks depending on which country was on which side of the war in Ukraine. And so the point that geopolitical transformations have economic consequences. This end of hyperglobalization and the fact that we are in an epoch of reglobalization will pose serious challenges for all countries, but especially India, because so much of our prosperity, long-term prosperity, and our ambition to be a developed country by 2047 depends on our interconnectedness with the world. And already, the share of FDI to GDP, the share of exports to GDP is much higher for India than most other middle-income countries, and this will only grow in the times to come. And so this is where foreign policy and economic policy intersect, because we need our political leadership, we need our foreign policy establishment to secure both our input markets and our output markets. And we've done that to some extent in several geographies. So for example, one of our largest trading partners is the GCC. I think about 15% of our total trade happens with GCC countries. And in the last 10 years, our political leadership has made a big effort to improve our political relationship with West Asia. It remains one of the big success stories of our foreign policy work. But there are other areas where we need to rethink our engagement both politically and economically. So for example, the Indo-Pacific. I mean, Dr. Singh talked about the fact that we first attempted TPP, then we attempted RCEP, then we attempted IPEF. Even in the IPEF, we are not participating in the trade pillar, if I'm correct. We have a supply chains agreement in IPEF, but that is not binding, right? And we must ask ourselves, except the United States, who are our big trading partners in the Indo-Pacific region? So these are some questions as a country we need to start asking to respond to the challenges that the current epoch throws before us. And again, because geoeconomics is a child of geopolitics, a lot of the concepts of geopolitics are now being sort of utilized and discussed in geoeconomics. So something that all of my previous speakers alluded to, strategic autonomy, which used to be a concept in a unipolar and a bipolar world. And today we use the term in the context of supply chains. So the resilience of supply chains that we speak about relates to the idea of strategic autonomy. There is, of course, strategic autonomy through diversification of your partners. But I want to place before you another aspect of strategic autonomy and de-risking a supply chains in terms of having alternates to choke points. So about 12% of the total global trade happens through the Suez Canal, and about 6% of it happens through the Panama Canal. We have to find alternates to these choke points, and therefore India's effort to build the India-Middle East economic corridor from West Asia to Europe, our efforts to give more energy to the north-south transport corridor between India and Russia and then onwards to Europe. All of these efforts to find new trade routes are very important in de-risking our supply chains. Just like you're seeing the change in political engagement, even in trade and even in our economic relationships, you're seeing a shift from multilateralism to plurilateralism and to bilateralism. Part of this is because the United States has shown no interest in reinvigorating the multilateral trading architecture. Trump made the WTO ineffective by not appointing anyone at the appellate body, but the Biden administration didn't overturn it, even though they overturned a lot of the other clawbacks from multilateral engagements. They chose not to restore the strength of the WTO trading system. And so because of that, you're seeing a lot more bilateral and plurilateral engagements, especially by India. We have signed an FTA with UAE. We've done an early harvest deal with Australia. We are having several other negotiations. But here I want to place before you another point, which again Arpita spoke about. Our larger objective is to secure our input markets and our output markets. Within that larger question, trade agreements, FTAs, is a subset. We often conflate signing an FTA with securing these markets. And that may not always be the case. So, for example, China is an intrinsic part of global supply chains. Does it have an FTA with the United States? Does it have an FTA with EU? Does it have an FTA with India? No. So these two questions are separate. How do we become an intrinsic part of global supply chains? And what is the role of trade agreements in securing it? These two questions need to be looked at separately. And we must not conflate one with the other. And here, if I may add a little frankly, we need to, something again that Dr. Singh keeps talking about, relook at the processes and the homework we do before we negotiate and sign these FTAs. I mean, why is it that we are now revisiting our Japan FTA, our ASEAN FTA? We have to do a lot of the homework that has been missing over the last several decades before we enter into these trade relationships. So let me end by saying that we don't truly appreciate the kind of changes we will have to respond to over the next 4 years. I think the rise of Trump at this moment, the tariffs that he's imposing on China will place a lot of pressure on a private sector, which is anyway operating below capacity. And now with China having to redirect some of its supply away from the United States, we will be under greater pressure. Our private sector will be under greater pressure. And the long-awaited private capex cycle that we are hoping will jumpstart our economy will further probably be delayed. And at the same time, we will have to think about alternatives to our model of infrastructure-led growth, which is now seeing sort of diminishing returns. So all of these, the domestic challenges we face, the challenges imposed because of the trade war between the United States and China, needs very creative and very innovative policy responses. I have a few thoughts on them, but maybe that's for off of the record. But let me end here by
question
saying,
answer session maybe.
yeah, let me end my initial remarks here by saying that within this crisis, there is an opportunity, and taking advantage of that opportunity will be the test of leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Basically, when we think of geoeconomics, we are thinking of outside initiatives. But the outside initiatives are built on the foundation of domestic reform and preparation. So the two go together. And this is an important insight to keep in mind, because last Trump regime, when he raised tariffs on China, that's when the China +1 re-emerged and opportunities emerged for us. At the current juncture, India has reached out with kind of solutions which could pave the way for softer landing. And with the tariffs on China +1 will re-emerge again in a stronger way, and opportunities will be there. But to manage to achieve the best out of those opportunities in a changing world, we have to keep in mind all the thoughts which have been there. And as far as the objectives are concerned, I commend everyone to see a speech by the Prime Minister which he made to heads of Indian missions abroad on 6th August 2021, where he's talked about how India would like to build with the capacity for linking up with supply chains, global supply chains. Now, the floor is open for questions. We started about 10 minutes late. Is it okay if we take 5 minutes of the next session too? So that we'll have about 12 minutes of question-answer session. Questions? Yes, please. Please identify yourself and then tell us.
I am Mohan Kumar, Director, Public Policy Research Institute, Trivandrum, Kerala.
And to whom would you be asking?
It is the entire panel. And the issue that has been parading before the emerging economies at large is that the United States of America wanted the universal recognition of US dollar as the medium of exchange for bilateral and multilateral trading. What would be its consequences if it figures in the discussion with our Prime Minister on February 13th?
Hi, I'm Priyanka Bhide. I'm the co-founder of Kubernetes Initiative, and my question is to Apurva Mishra. Could you elaborate further as to why trade is not being furthered within the Indo-Pacific, and who could be the partners outside of the USA that India should be looking at?
One more, maybe. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Brigadier Samyal. I'm from the CCCS, and my question is China specific. Ma'am, you had given a point regarding China FTAs. So what we are noticing is that China has already foreseen to a certain extent the kind of competition it's going to have with US, and its trade links with the global south are increasing, and the flow towards Russia and other countries. So is there a case in point for us also to look beyond the US in this particular turmoil? Because all of us are focusing primarily on US. There is a market in EU, there's a global south. So this opportunity seems to be growing for China, which they've already seen to a certain extent.
So the first question on US-India discussions and the dollar, US dollar. I think de facto US dollar is the primary currency, and there are diplomatic ways of just taking the conversation forward. Where Trump was upset about was the BRICS countries trying to create alternatives, and basically there will be some clever diplomatic ways of averting it, but I don't think it will be a major danger point in the conversation. This can be taken forward in a friendly manner, in my perspective.
Yes, my simple point was to contrast our engagement with countries to our west, the West Asia countries, where our political and our economic relationship seems to be moving in the same direction, and in the Indo-Pacific, where we didn't show any interest for a variety of reasons in the TPP and then with the RCEP, and even in the Indo-Pacific economic framework, we are participating in several pillars, but not in the trade pillar. Our FTAs with Japan and our FTAs with ASEAN have now been subjected to review. We are reviewing both of those FTAs because we think that they have the trade balances because of these FTAs is not good for our country. So the larger point I was making is we need an economic strategy for the Indo-Pacific also. Whether that strategy focuses more on multilateral economic relationships, plurilateral economic relationships, similar to the one that we have with Quad, or with bilateral economic relationship. That's a choice for the policymakers to make. But my larger point was that the political investment we are making in the Indo-Pacific region must be matched by similar effort and similar resources in building our economic relationships in the region.
Thank you. I just want to take one aspect of that answer, that in the FTAs, the negotiations focused mostly on trade barriers created through tariffs, while the major trade barriers are created through non-tariff measures or barriers, when measures become barriers. And you need a different methodology to address them. And some of the CPTPP, for example, has a provision in its chapter 2, paragraph 9, how to address these things in a quick way. So we should do a survey of various options and start focusing on how to create mechanisms for market access problems that arise due to non-tariff measures. And there are various ways, discussions with regulators, problem solving. APEC is a very good model for that. So those are kind of things we should do and one look at and then find out what is our best way to go forward. That's the kind of preparation Apoorv was talking about.
And just one last thing about why is it that our FTAs see such low rates of utilization? Why don't our entrepreneurs, business, don't use these FTAs as much as we would like them to? That's another question to think about.
That might also be due to our own processes. One is information. We had done a survey of over 500 firms where only about 10 to 20% utilized or knew about the FTAs. So we have to work on multiple fronts, but the problems have been identified. The solutions have to be looked at in a coherent manner. In fact, if you take the supply chain model, the supply chain inputs come from various sectors. These sectors have agencies or ministries or departments which are different, which create the policies relevant for them. If there is no coordination between them, you can keep talking about the importance of supply chains, you will not be an efficient supply chain provider. So these kind of things need to come up domestically. That's the domestic preparation I was talking about. Arpita, the third question.
This question, I'll answer your question a little differently. But first, I was in a Chinese think tank summit. And in that, the Chinese scholars were saying that Trump is actually retaliating to actions taken by China. And if you look back, you will see that it was China who first imposed the restrictions on American technology companies. And then America started reacting violently. Had China not touched the Apple and the WhatsApps of the world, they thought that it would not have happened. Now, having said that, the reason China wanted to do that and probably put a barrier was because it wanted to become the technology leader in the world with the 4IR technology coming in. Now, coming to your point and Harsh's point, when China started signing the FTAs, it went for a 95% tariff reductions. It covered almost all of the FTAs in the region. Then it moved to Africa. It could not really go in for FTAs with the European Union and the Americans because the FTAs with these kind of countries require regulatory negotiations and harmonization of standards, IP and all the other part where the Chinese Chinese regime was weak. So what it tried to ensure was a tariff. What it tried to ensure through the RCEP was, RCEP, if you look at the tariff lines, they are poorer than the bilateral FTAs. What it tried to ensure through the RCEP was a rule of origin. And RCEP delivered on two counts. One is the rule of origin. One is that in 2 years' time, countries will be a part of ICSDS. So there is a investment protection. So now that brings to the point of the rules of origin. If you put a rule of origin of 40% everywhere in your FTA, let's say if you do a trade agreement with the with the UAE, where you bring in raw gold and you process and you export it to the other countries, you can never utilize that because labor can never be 40% of the, of the cost of a gold jewelry or processing. So therefore, we need to really think about our rules of origin. We need to think about what went wrong in Chinese approach to growing bigger and ruling the world through technology. And we also need to think that where we can have a more collaborative models in this. Having said that, in a trade agreement, like suppose if I give 60% tariff liberalization and somebody gives 95, the other side also gives them a lot more, maybe 90 and maybe 70 to us. So if you give less, you get less. So if trade agreements will not be useful in a world where other countries are giving more and you are giving less. So we need to be more prepared, as as Vajpayee said, that if you want to do ASEAN agreement, bring your tariff to first ASEAN level. So we need to think about other ways. We need to think about harmonization of standards for our companies to move forward, and that may help us. Tariff as a tool will not be long enough to support the domestic industries to grow and be a part of the global value chain.
This is a very important point, that we feel that FTAs will give our exporters a better chance, but we are competing with other economies. If their FTAs are better than ours, then we are still less competitive. And competition comes in various forms, including through investment in our country. And investment in our country requires the investor, the focus for growth, if you learn from China, Vietnam, is large scale is very important. And large scale requires policy certainty. The political risk involved with large scale investment is much higher than with small scale investment. Policy certainty is something we have really not focused on. So these are some of the internal things. And on rules of origin, just setting the cat amongst the pigeons, with digital technology becoming the rule of the game, the whole basis of rule of origin will be destroyed, because you will have M2M conversation, machine to machine. So you will never know where the product has been actually made. And then a 3D printer could be located within India to produce that. It's extremely difficult in that scenario to say this proportion of the product has been made in this country. So FTAs also have a lifetime. I think the nature of FTAs will change. The rule of origin will no longer be able to be implemented effectively after about 10 to 15 years. We have to keep that in mind. One last question. Yes, please. You and then Pradeep. We'll very quick questions, then we can have three, because we have very little time.
Yeah, I'm Komodo Vasan. I run the Chennai Center for China Studies. This question is to Apur, since you are in the hot seat. It looks like that we are comparatively better off in the West, with the GCC and others in terms of our economic engagement, but we have not done so well in terms of our Act East policy. Are there specific recommendations on what is being reviewed to see that, our Act East actually is a component of your economic engagement?
I see we have 40 seconds left. Pradeep, can you quickly ask the question? Okay. We may overflow in 1 more minute. Yeah.
No, I mean, just one point which I think, because of, India has been following a lot of protectionism, which is not good. I mean, we are not open-minded at all. Secondly, and importantly, this as one domestic issue which Harsh, which you keep on, something which you've been working on, is we have to think seriously about improving our competitiveness. That is lacking very sadly. Thank you.
Even a question is a contribution. No, there.
Thank you. I'm A. Marshall Matheswaran. I head the Peninsula Foundation. I just want to ask, pose a pointer to both Dr. Arpita and Apoor. Our weakness has been the level of manufacturing, which is still about 13-14%, and extremely low. And we are in a catch-22 because we're so dependent on services sector particularly. And by not being part of any of the trade groupings, are we protecting? We're not becoming competitive. And when you're not competitive, this is going to be a Hobson's choice for the policymakers all the time. So what do you say on that?
I'll just respond to all of your three questions with a counter question of my own. What role have our FTAs played in hollowing out of India's manufacturing capabilities?
No, basically, any change in operational condition which you create require preparation of domestic ability to use those conditions efficiently. That is the crux of the efforts. We have all talked about how to address several of them, and your last question actually focuses on that in a very specific way with FTAs involved. We have to take all this into account and think in terms of we have to grow large, then we need large-scale production. What is required for large-scale production? The policy elements for large-scale, efficient, global value chain connectivity is a very special kind of approach. We can learn from Vietnam, for example, a small country with a large presence in the global market. China, we can't really learn from because it has freedom, degrees of freedom we don't have. So basically, domestic is the foundation for the outreach abroad, but that outreach abroad needs to be strengthened through strategies and capabilities, through initiatives which we are focusing on, but we have to do it in a coherent manner so one part of the chain doesn't stop the growth process and the momentum of the entire chain. That's the way to look at it. And geopolitics will keep on changing, bringing surprises. So we have to create points of certainty, areas, islands of certainty, with focusing on dynamic competitiveness, not just competitiveness.
So, foreign policy begins at home, sir.
That's right. Yeah. We are also, foreign policy also is a value chain. So with that, I thank the organizers. I thank all the experts who have shared their thoughts with us. And as he said, we should use the Trump policy scenario as a domestic opportunity, but with returns both domestically and abroad. So thank you very much.